just want to start this right now because I think it'd be great. When you have a room full of women and gentlemen, you have a room full of stories. So we're going to hear from two people today. I'd like to still go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves, so that might take a little while. So let's start down. Let me first start that. I want to start how this luncheon came about. So Miss Ella, who is in the back in the purple. Ella, want to wave to everybody? She's the committee. Ella is a committee. Ella came to me and said, we need to have a Women's History Month thing because women are important in this community and you need to have a Women's History Month celebration. And so she called me every single week in December and every single week in January, and then we planned something. And so Ella is here. You can read her buttons. They're really cool about voting for women and women's rights and the Rosie women. But we are going to also introduce Amy and Christine in the back. Amy and Christine, who helped set this up. Thank you very much, ladies. So we have some elected officials here. You had met Kate Berninsky and Tanya, and then Michael. We have the president of the Michigan League of Women Voters here, Paula Bowman. Teresa Peterson is a pastor of Geneva Presbyterian Church. We have two wonderful speakers here, which I'm going to introduce to you. So Laura Carter Callow, right here in the peach here. She was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. She has worked for more than 40 years to gain ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment on both the national and state levels. She was raised in a single-parent family. Laura saw firsthand the economic struggles women face. Ever since, Laura has spent her life working for women's civil rights through letter writing, activism, advocacy, community organizing, and speeches. Her activism in the women's rights movement began in earnest in 1972 as a founding member of the Northwest Wayne chapter of the National Organization for Women. At the time, she worked for legislation to end discrimination in credit and allow women the right to have a credit in their own name, because she experienced this when she was younger that her mother was unable to. In 1976, following the first of 3 unsuccessful attempts to rescind Michigan's ratification of the ERA, Laura helped form Michigan ERA America, a coalition whose first purpose was to protect Michigan's ratification. Michigan ERA America also sought to educate the public about the ERA and raise money for ratification efforts in non-ratified states. The coalition has continued working for the latter two ever since. From 1977 to 1986, she recorded a monthly commentary of various aspects of the ERA on the Point of View radio program for WJR Detroit. She has also been active in her community. Former First Lady of Michigan, Helen Milliken, referred to Laura as the Susan B. Anthony of Michigan. She was inducted into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame in 2010. Laura is a retired art teacher. She was married to James F. Callow for 65 years and is the mother of 3, grandmother of 6, and great-grandmother of 2. Now, this is an old bio. Do you have more now?
I have 1 on the way.
Okay, 1 on the way. There you go. 1.5. So Laura also is with the League of Women Voters, and that's where I first met her, with the Livonia League of Women Voters. Canton's chapter had just stopped, and so the closest one was in Livonia, and that's where I met Laura and Paula. And so just the amazing stories that they've been telling ever since. And Laura she used to live in Livonia, but she now lives in Canton and Waltonwood, and some of her friends are here in the front also.
I'm a member of AAU.
Oh, yes.
I'm a member of I'm a member of AAUW, American Association of University Women also.
Yes, we're going to update that bio up there.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak on women's history. However, I prefer the word her story because history is his story, and women have been pretty much left out. But when the framers of the Constitution wrote the words, "All men are created equal," it is very clear from a number of sources that they did not have women in mind. They did not mean all men either. Native American men and black men were not included. Also, they didn't mean all white men, just white men who were rich and owned property. Consequently, our history and our herstory is one of people of color, regardless of sex, and women of all colors, regardless of race, seeking the rights and protections promised in the Constitution. To me, racism and sexism are Siamese twins. If one is present, the other is likely to be there too. Now, in 1776, Abigail Adams, wife of our second president, was aware of the lowly status of women, and she wrote to her husband John saying, "In that new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power in the hands of husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. And if particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion." Well, John Adams' reply was rather insulting. He said, "I had to laugh at your new code of laws. This is the first time that a new tribe, meaning women, had grown discontented." His answer made it clear that his wife's request would be ignored, and women did not foment a rebellion at that time. However, by the 1830s, they were actively working for the right to own their own wages and the right to own property. Well, in 1840, Lucretia Mott, a Quaker minister, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton met in London. Both women were abolitionists and delegates from the American Anti-Slavery Society. They were there to attend an anti-slavery meeting. The convention refused to recognize women, and the two delegates were required to sit in the visitors' gallery at the back of the room and not allowed to speak. This hypocrisy made it clear to both women that they had no more rights than the slaves they were trying to free. In response, they decided to convene a women's rights convention when they returned to America. On July 19th and 20th, 1848, Stanton and Mott, along with 3 other women, convened the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York. Despite scarce publicity, 300 people, mostly area residents, showed up. Prior to the meeting, Stanton drew up a declaration of sentiments. It was patterned after the Declaration of Independence and contained a combined list of grievances and demands. I don't have time to go over all of them, but I will mention 3. The first was the right to own property. Women could own nothing. If an abused wife ran away from home, she could be charged with theft for the clothing she was wearing on her back. The right to higher education. There were many colleges and universities at the time, but they were not open to women, including our own University of Michigan. It was founded in 1817, but did not open its doors to women until 1870. And lastly, the right to vote. It took 72 years to gain the right to vote, but more importantly, it is the only constitutionally guaranteed right women have. All other rights have been granted through laws that can be weakened or abolished, and as you all know from the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, women's rights may not be protected by the courts. The right to vote is very empowering. It allows women to elect candidates who support women's rights. And over the years, a number of such laws have been enacted. The 2 most significant ones are Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and Title IX of the 1972 Education Act. Title VII protects individuals in employment based on their race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The word sex was initially added to Title VII as a poison pill, hoping to kill the bill. Some legislators thought it was a joke. Does this mean men can be Playboy bunnies, they quipped? And others were concerned because Title VII would strike down so-called protective legislation for women. Protective labor laws were well-intentioned, but they did not protect women. Rather, they prohibited them from gaining jobs or promotions. In addition, these laws were unevenly applied. For example, weight limits were set for women in factories, but not for the waitresses and the heavy trays they carry. But once Title VII was enacted, there was a flood of complaints by women from all over the country. Initially, these complaints were ignored. The National Organization for Women was founded in order to put public pressure on the government to uphold its own laws and to enforce this legislation. Title VII is one of the catalysts for the rise of the second wave of feminism. Title IX of the 1972 Education Acts prohibits sex discrimination in education programs or activity receiving federal financial assistance. This includes pregnancy, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Title IX is best known for the effect it has had on women's sports. Once given the opportunity to play, women came out in droves. But Title IX also opened classroom doors to both sexes. For example, girls could now take shop classes such as woodworking, and boys could take cooking. Law schools and medical schools could no longer use quotas. Admittance had to be merit-based. However, universities and colleges and school systems across the country were not prepared for Title IX. There was little or no money designated for additional classes. Gaining compliance became a goal of second-wave feminists. In 1973, a Title IX complaint was filed against the University of Michigan. U of M spent more than $2.5 million on men's athletics in the 1972-73 school year, but spent $0 on women's athletics. Female athletics received no scholarships. U of M women's teams were officially considered club sports. That meant that athletes had to do everything themselves, from seeking a volunteer coach, scheduling practice time, washing their own uniforms, and carpooling to games all over the state. Men's teams traveled by bus or plane. At the time of the complaint, the university was reluctant to comply with Title IX. It would have required the athletic department to spend the same resources on women's athletics as it did on the highly profitable football program. As a result, the university delayed its compliance with Title IX regulations until the early 1980s. But I hasten to add that U of M was not unique. Other educational institutions across the country behaved the same way. Also, private schools, such as Hillsdale College, stopped taking federal money altogether in order to avoid complying with the law. Not all opposition to Title IX was based on economics. In one instance, it was male chauvinism. I was a member of NOW in the 1970s, and my chapter learned that a high school shop teacher in this area was refusing to teach girls. He'd never taught girls before, and he wasn't about to start, law or no law, and his principal upheld him. Well, when informed at a school board meeting, board members unanimously decreed that their district would comply with the law. But about a year later, I gave a speech at that high school, and one of the girls told me that her sister had been one of the first girls to take a shop, and the boys had been very mean. I explained to her that her sister was a first woman. Almost without exception, men are resentful when women enter a field that has been men only. This means that first women have to be strong and brave, and because they are, they hold the door open so that other women can come through. And as more women come through, men get used to the idea, and women's presence is no longer an issue. I told her to go home and thank her sister for being strong and brave. She kept the door open for you and other girls. And when I finished, every girl in that room was sitting up very straight and looking proud. I'm certain that if Abigail Adams could come back, she would be amazed and pleased at the great progress women have made, especially in the 20th century. But social progress often brings a backlash from defenders of the status quo. And presently, our country is in the midst of a backlash against both minorities and women's rights. That's why the Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, remains so important. As mentioned earlier, voting is the only constitutionally protected right that women have. 100 years ago, in 1923, Alice Paul, a suffragist leader, recognized this and introduced the ERA into Congress. The wording is, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The ERA was introduced into Congress for the next 49 years, where it was routinely buried in committee. Michigan's own U.S. Representative Martha Griffiths circulated a discharge petition that required 218 signatures. Representative Gerald Ford, a Republican, also from Michigan, helped her get the last few signatures. The Republican Party endorsed the ERA in 1940, but dropped its support in 1980 when Reagan was elected president. The Democratic Party endorsed the ERA in 1944 and still does. For a brief golden era of 35 years, the ERA had bipartisan support. In 1972, the ERA passed both houses of Congress overwhelmingly, but foes of the ERA attached a 7-year time limit in the proposing clause. A number of states, including Michigan, immediately ratified, and it seemed like a sure thing. But opponents of equality became very active, and ratification efforts stalled. The time limit was extended 3 more years to 1982. Sadly, ERA supporters were only able to get 35 states, 3 states short of the 38 needed for ratification. It was believed that we would have to start over. However, ERA supporters changed their minds in 1992 when Congress accepted the ratification of the 27th Amendment concerning congressional pay raise. This amendment was proposed in 1789 and finally ratified 203 years later. Advocates for the ERA began working to ratify 3 more states because there is no time limit for ratifying amendments in the Constitution. The ERA time limit is in the proposing clause of the amendment, and states ratify the amendment, not the proposing clause, and the time limit is flexible. It was extended once. In 2017, Nevada became the 36th state to ratify the ERA. Illinois followed in 2018, and Virginia in 2020. The National Archivist published the ratifications of Nevada and Illinois, but refused to do so for Virginia without a court order or action by Congress. This is because the Justice Department during the Trump administration issued a brief saying the ERA time limit is still in effect. ERA supporters went to court, and earlier this month, the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia issued a ruling saying that it did not have the authority to change the deadline. This is a matter for Congress. In January, joint resolutions were introduced into both houses of Congress to recognize the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. At this point, both are in committee. It is my hope that you will remember this unfinished business for the Constitution. Without the ERA, women's rights are not secure. Let your elected representatives in Congress know that the Equal Rights Amendment is fully ratified. Urge them to do everything they can to put it in the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a number of things still that people take for granted that women don't realize they can lose if something like this is not continued. Thank you for your work. So our next person, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Michigan Women's Commission. The 15-member Michigan Women's Commission was created by statute in 1968. Commission duties include reviewing the status of women in Michigan, directing attention to critical problems confronting women, and recognizing women's accomplishments and contribution to Michigan. Commissioners are appointed by the governor and serve 3 terms. Lisa Cawley is on the Michigan Women's Commission. Lisa Cawley is the Midwest Public Service Portfolio Lead and the Michigan Public Service Account Lead for Accenture. In these roles, she is dedicated to bringing one Accenture to create more effective and equitable outcomes for people across the Midwest. Colley is also the Office Managing Director for the Michigan Avenue of Accenture. In this role, she works to weave Accenture into the fabric of the communities in which we live, work, and play. She is focused on strengthening relationships with clients, acting as a passionate advocate for people and serving the community. Colley has spent her career in the public sector. The theme among all of Lisa's work is her interest in helping her clients solve difficult problems using creative, pragmatic, and innovative solutions. Lisa is familiar to many in Michigan, having served as a Detroit Corporate Citizen Executive Sponsor, and through her board leadership positions with NPower, Citizen Detroit, the Capital Area IT Council, and the United Way of Southeast Michigan. Notably, Lisa is the first woman and LGBTQ+ person to hold the OMD role in Detroit. Lisa is passionate about impact investing, and in particular gender and racial lens in investing. She leads the Michigan Invest for Better cohort and is actively engaged in finding ways to unlock and unleash the power of capital to create a more equitable community. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you all so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. I am part of our Michigan Women's Commission, and as I was listening to Laura, I was reminded of a story. Growing up, my parents traveled a lot when I was growing up, so I lived with two sets of grandparents. And one of the two grandmothers I had was an early member of the National Organization for Women. So I grew up hearing a lot about the ERA, and it just so happened that there was one week that I was staying with my grandparents, my grandmother, and it was 5th grade. And I came home on Monday, and she said, "How was school?" And I said, "It was good, but I have to give a speech on Friday." And she's like, "Okay, well, we can work on that." She said, "What's the topic going to be?" And I was like, "Graham, I have no idea." And she says, "Well, I know what it's going to be. It's going to be about the Equal Rights Amendment." And to this day, I remember the opening line of that speech, which went something like this: "Do you think women should have the same rights as men? So do I, and that's why I support the Equal Rights Amendment." So I feel like it is continuing my legacy that my grandmother set, to be a part of the Michigan Women's Commission and to be focused on the needs of women here in the state. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the commission and what we do. As was said, it started in 1968. Each governor appoints a set of commissioners, and the focus is really to do a couple things. One is to survey the women of Michigan to understand what the kind of needs and desires and issues are. And I think, as we heard in what you shared with us, they remain remarkably the same as they were with Abigail Adams. And so what I think what we've been focused on, which is very interesting, started pre-COVID. So in 2019, Governor Whitmer joined the Michigan Women's Commission on gender equity conversations across the state. So this was a chance for us to hear from women and what their concerns were, what they were looking for. And we heard a lot about economic security issues. So again, I'm going to remember this is 2019. So it was paid leave, pay equity, pathways to higher wage jobs, and the number one issue everywhere they went was affordable, accessible childcare. And then the pandemic hit, and every single one of those issues escalated. We saw a significant loss of women out of the workforce because of primarily childcare. And so what helped shape our thinking and our efforts was really around addressing a lot of those. And quite frankly, because of the pandemic, a lot of our focus turned on how do we get women back into the workforce, right? So many had to step out because they had to care for their children. I'm a mother of 3 small children. I'm a fairly well-resourced person, and it was one of the most difficult times of my life. And I can only imagine what it was for those who had to go to work during COVID. I know that there were children at home by themselves when they went to remote school, at least in our school district. Very real, right? Very real. Some had to go to work, some couldn't, right? So we have a lot of women who had to opt out. So the focus was, all right, how do we influence, policy and decision-making and funding to really help women get back into the workforce? And I will say too, more broadly, working parents, right? And we all know that tends to hit more of the moms than this one spouse versus another is what I'll say, or one parent versus another. So one of the primary outcomes of this was the Michigan Tri-Share Child Care Program. So this is a really wonderful program that I also know is getting some traction and attention from other states. So Michigan is, I think, a leader in this space. So it's very much what the title says, Tri-Share. So we're going to split the cost of childcare 3 ways, essentially. So it's a partnership between the parent, the business that they work for, and the state, and each pay a third. So that has really, we piloted it. It's scaling across the state. We've gotten appropriations for it in the last legislature, and now that the legislature has changed, we're pretty confident we will continue to get appropriations for it and scale it. I say to you, my ask is for all of you in this room, please learn more about this program. Please help people know about it. If you work for a company that is looking for a way to help attract parents back into the workforce, into your company, this is a great program. So that is my one pitch on the child care. But it's been as you all know, when you know that your children are being cared for, it makes it easier for you to do the things you need to do, right? You can stay focused on where your attention needs to be, and you don't have to worry about what's going on with them, right? So I'm going to also tell you a little bit that is a bit tangential to the Michigan Women's Commission, but supported by it. So part of the efforts the governor's been making around childcare is also there will be 1,000 new childcare centers created in Michigan by 2024. That is significant. Yes, the wow was appropriate. And what I also think is fantastic about that, and why as a commissioner I am talking about it, is it does 2 things. It gets our kids in safe, quality childcare, and it's also an economic opportunity for female entrepreneurs who typically run childcare centers. And so that's what's really exciting about this as well, is this sort of hits kind of two really important things we want to see: people getting back into the economy, people creating their own opportunities and being supported, and then also being that support allowing us to take care of more children in qualified and quality childcare facilities. So I think it's a tremendous amount of work that's going on. It's very important. The Tri-Share program is one of the best things I've seen. As you heard, I spent a lot of time in public service across the country and in the Midwest. This is unique, and it's really exciting. So that's one of the things that came out of these conversations we had. The other is something called Fostering Access, Rights, and Equity, called FAIR. This is we received funding from the U.S. Department of Labor Women's Bureau, and we've been working to create, through partnerships with community partners, hosted a series of webinars to reach out to 110,000 working women for information about resources available to support them. So a couple things. One is that those webinars and that work is really to help women understand what they're eligible for in terms of support. It is also around helping them connect to pathways to higher wage jobs. So you may be hearing a lot about apprenticeships or those kinds of things. We actually see very few women taking advantage of apprenticeships. I think it might have something to do with moving into men's industries. However, that is a part of the effort and initiative around the Michigan Women's Commission to continue to promote and support women moving into those kinds of opportunities. Finding the tuition-free degrees, using certification programs. Certification programs can be wonderful ways to jumpstart people into more living wage jobs without having to incur a lot of tuition debt. And then the last piece of that is really understanding resources to exercise their workplace rights. So I think similarly, you're hearing echoes from the past still here with us here in the present. So how do women understand what their workplace rights are? Who do they need to go to get the support? So all of that is being driven through the FAIR program we're running through the U.S. Department's grant. our Department of which one was it? Labor. That's the one. We also heard a lot about, I'd say, unconscious and implicit bias in the workforce. And so one of the outcomes of hearing that feedback is this: we run a 21-day racial equity challenge. So what this is it's essentially a set of hosted webinars, and each commissioner takes one series. And we host seminars where we teach people about implicit bias, unconscious bias, to help elevate understanding and knowledge of what that is. So it runs for 21 days. It's all virtual, so it doesn't matter where you are, you can join, which is great. And those have been wildly popular, so we continue to keep those going. And then I think where we are right now is kind of what's next. So those are all going. The governor has a new 4-year term, and so we're taking some time to really, as a commission, kind of figure out where else we want to point our attention, what other issues, items, actions we want to be taking. I do know that one of them will probably continue to be leaning into the apprenticeships. How are we helping people, women, learn about and get access to the kind of opportunities that we see in a lot of growing industries? And, if you look at what's happening in the economy right now, we're going through what I call, personally, I call it the electrification of the economy, right? There are an insane amount of jobs that are about to be created. And the opportunity for equity within that is enormous. And we have systems in place already that we can take advantage of, like apprenticeship models, like programs like Going Pro, and even the tuition-free opportunities the governor has put on put in place, all are available for the taking. And so I think we have a tremendous opportunity here from the commission's perspective to continue to champion those and be a voice for them, and also to be able to create those pathways for women into all of these industries that are booming and will continue to grow the economy over the next, I think, 10 to 20 years. So that's what's happening with the Michigan Women's Commission. Thank you again for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Lisa. And it's great how you paired up, both of you, because Laura talked about the past and brought us up to the present, and Lisa took her from the present. So I guess that one question is so Laura talked about the ERA and how important it is and how we're getting there. How would Laura, in your opinion, based on what Lisa said, how would the ERA help some of the issues that she's working on, some of the programs?
Well, I see the ERA as bringing protections that we might not have, but more important, it protects the rights that we already do have, and that's why it is so important.
Thank you. Lisa, how could you use the ERA to help the items that you're talking about?
Well, I think it is important to say we've got to lock in the rights we have, and I think I'll echo how we've realized how tenuous it was with the Roe v. Wade decision by the Supreme Court. I think that understanding what our rights are, so I think that's maybe something I'll take back to our commission from this meeting and say, hey, I think we need to revisit and be clear about what are the rights we have and which one is secured, as I have clearly learned today, and what else can we be doing? Because I think about workforce, right? I think about workforce and I think about your workplace rights. And if we have women moving into traditionally male-dominated roles like construction, like transportation, like information technology, that's the world I live in, it's a very male-dominated industry, then we need to make sure we have our rights secured so that when we run into the issues that we all know that we run into regularly still, that we have a solid footing on it. And I think that's what is so important. It feels so much more tenuous now. And I think the ERA could really take that sort of anxiety away, if you will, and just, it's there. Like there's no more debate or conversation about it. So I think that that would be something really applicable to what we're trying to do.
And the beauty of that is it not only help women, it would help our minorities and.
Everybody.
As was,
Yeah.
yes, everybody,
Yeah.
as you said.
Yeah.
So I personally come from a family of 5 girls. And growing up, I mean, a little bungalow, and my dad was an electrician, so he put outlets in one bathroom so we could all use it at the same time and put mirrors everywhere so you could space out. But one thing I have to say is, so I mean, it wasn't a happy marriage, so probably a marriage that my mother should have left a long time before she did, but she didn't because she had 5 daughters. But I think one thing that I and my sisters took from that is that we had to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. So education was important, and getting a job was important, and out of that, so we have 3 engineers and a physical therapy assistant and a teacher. And so, I mean, we knew that if something happened if we ever got married, that was important. But I think what is dismaying to me now is I have 2 friends, and I myself, as you know, as an engineer, whenever I had my children and I would leave the workforce and come back in, I was starting over all the time. I was always starting over, even though I had years of experience. But just 2 friends in the past probably 3 months, going through divorce, they did the same thing where they worked part-time or not at all and took care of the children, and now their children are in high school, but their husbands, they're getting a divorce, and they're kind of in the same boat as my mother was, 50 years ago. So they have a house that they can afford right now, but what happened is that the judge has ordered them to sell the house. So as you know, when you sell your house, you have to go into move into something more expensive. So they're almost on the street. And it seems like we haven't made a lot of progress in that area. So what are your thoughts on that, Lisa?
I think that one that gets to, so we have women, so I grew up in a household with a dad and a mom. My children are growing up in a household with 2 women. So I'm a 2-mom family, and that also means we make less money, right? So what I think that speaks to is it's important for women, I think, regardless of your status, to understand, one, pay equity, wherever you're working, right? 2, I think we have a responsibility to also figure out the right kind of programs. And I'll speak to something I can speak to about our company and many other companies, but there are programs that are being created so that women who have to step out can come back in. There are more programs like that, and I think those need to have more investment. And there's something called the Mom Project. Maybe you're familiar with this. It is specifically for women who were in more professional, like engineers, all that, right? Who had to step off to take care of children and come back in. And the program is essentially able to bring you back in, give you more flexibility in coming back in for whatever, and also be able to allow you to not lose, like we get to take it. I think one of the things that's helpful in what's happening now and needs to be encouraged is talent is needed. So that's actually a really important thing that's happening in the market. So we want to be able to access that talent as quickly as possible. So I think from a business perspective, there's some incentive to actually invest in how do we actually tap into that female, typically, talent and get it back in faster, right? And not have any loss. I also think, and this is again personally with my own investment, I'm an impact investor. I focus on women's issues, and part of the reason why I do that is because I think there's so many women who actually don't understand how finance works. And that is really, and when you decide to opt out of the workforce, that's a very significant financial decision that I think friends like yours get themselves into. And so I think there's that component of it. And then I think there's just also, we need to pay women who stay home. You need to pay women who stay, that is a full-time job. So your Social Security, the amount of Social Security you're gonna get has been impacted, right? And so I think there's actually very real emphasis needed on how do we compensate stay-at-home women, moms, it's typically them, stay-at-home parents, because that is actual work that requires some form of compensation. And there are a lot of smart people around here, I think can figure it out. And there's been a lot of thinking about it already. But I think that is actually something that really has to be addressed, because it is such a risk that only women, predominantly women, bear. And there's nothing to back it up. Like, so we have to educate ourselves better about what I've spent so many years with women who just like, my husband takes care of that. And I'm like, you might want to know what is happening. And just because your anatomy is different actually doesn't mean they understand the stock market better. Like, just FYI, that doesn't actually make them smarter about it at all. So I think those are the kinds of things we really should we can put on the table. We have to have those conversations. We have to get smart about it. At the very least, we got to talk about Social Security, because that actually has long-term economic impacts, right? And so I think those are definitely some of the ways we have to be dealing with that.
Thank you. That's very good. And I know, Laura, your story also, your mother was a single mother long ago when she couldn't even get a credit card in her name because she was a woman.
I will tell you that I was a school teacher, and the Detroit Board of Education, once you became pregnant, you had to take a leave of absence. And I had my first son was born, and 14 months later, I had my second son. And I planned to go back to teaching when the boys were both 2 and 3. But when I looked into childcare, it was so expensive that I would have earned only $10 a week, because I would paid all the rest of my salary to take care of them. So I decided not to do that. I was lucky I found a job teaching adults at night, but that was the way. But the other story I have is that back in the 60s, there was a bill in Congress to provide daycare for welfare mothers. The idea was that if we could give these women daycare, they could get jobs, become self-sufficient, and when their children were grown, and it would actually reduce the welfare rolls. And it made through both houses of Congress, but President Nixon vetoed it because communists provide daycare for their children. And all I could say is, well, communists eat, drink, and do all other things. But anyway, and there was an attempt to override, but not enough votes to do it. And that was way back when, and the problem has become far more acute.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that speaks to the question of, I think that is one of the primary drivers of when deciding who's going to opt out of the workforce. If you are not paid equally, that's going to drive one of those decisions. And if the childcare is so expensive, right? So those two work they work hand in glove to sort of put a lot of women in the position that I think your friends are in. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Gail, go ahead.
Yes. So we have about, I think, 15 or 20, which I think is remarkably low considering the number of employers we have. I think some of that is due to just the amount of money we had for publicity, right? Like, you got to get the word out and how we do that. The commission's got 2 people working for it, right? So I think the more we can communicate about it, the more we will get into it. I also think that there might be, and this is again my personal opinion, I do think that there might be some companies who think, oh, I don't really want to deal with like the bureaucracy of, having the government pay for a third. And so I think there's some like education we have to do about how easy the process is, right? So I think there's sort of some publicity, and I think some sort of working with government kind of bias that I think if we can continue to work through, we can get there. And all the employers who are in it think it's fabulous. So I think that, but it's working well. That's why I want you all to know about it. Like, go talk to your employers. Like, if you don't offer this, like, tell them about this program. So I do not know the answer to, like, is it GM and Ford and those guys? What I can say is that the dominant industries or size of companies in Michigan are medium to small, right? So they're really the primary drivers of the labor market. So those are really more of the targets because they can't really, Ford can afford childcare subsidies. So can GM, so can, all of the big ones can. And I would argue, I would probably guess that most of them already do, right? Because of the need to retain talent. And these guys have figured out it's important you keep us. It's the mid to small size where they've got 10 employees and this is it's a big ask, right? And so that's really the market that we need to really get involved in this. And they're, quite frankly, it's harder for them to get talent than the big boys and girls, right? So that's really who we want to see more of coming into the program.
Just to let you know on that, so coming from Ford, Ford doesn't offer it.
Oh, there you go. We can go talk to Ford.
They used to. They used to actually open child care centers, and they closed them all probably in the early 2000s.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to do, is to run child care centers when
Yes.
that's actually not your expertise.
Yes, and actually even Chrysler, I was on a committee where we tried to start one, and they took a survey of the women, and they said the women want to place the kids closer to home than at work. And basically, we have the workforce will age, and then it'll go out of business, so that was their excuse.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I joined the commission recently, so that's definitely on my agenda to get it on the agenda. So yes, I think we could certainly be doing more to educate women about either through that or telling about, there's a lot of programs actually out there already, so I think it could be a way that we could communicate it out. And I think it's a personal passion of mine, so I will see if I can get that integrated, but I'll certainly take it back, for sure.
Question was on educating women about finances. Any other questions?
I thank you for that. The system is designed to make you intimidated. It's specifically designed to do that. They use fancy words. It's just it's designed that way. And so part of what I think we all have a responsibility to, and I'm definitely going to take this back, is to say, how do we take that away and say, this is my money. You work for me. You tell me how this works. Yes. That's right. This is how this goes. And I also think that you can also you have the ability to also find information now in so much easier ways, right? There's just so much information out there about how to do this and to understand it. But I do think that is something that if I could have my way, I wish we all were a little more literate about financials. And you don't have to play the stock market. Like, it's not all about like stocks and all of that and watch, CNBC every morning or whatever. But I do think it's important you understand where your money is and what's happening to it and what the impacts are of decisions that you make about your own personal finance, even in a marriage, your partnerships. So congratulations to you. It's a heck of a story. Yeah? A very important helper, so.
Any other questions or comments? So for those of you who didn't hear Kate, her husband was on a foreign assignment in France, and the daycare was subsidized for working women.
Stay home.
And non-working women, yeah. So she was asking why we didn't have that here.
It does feel like with all the women who are running this state, at least, we
Yes.
might have a shot at doing some of these things. So I'm unclear about Washington, D.C., but
Yes.
maybe we can do that here.
Keep pushing forward.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. From the commission standpoint, I think the financial literacy agenda item is something to take back to say, is this something we could be focusing on? I personally do not go to talk to young women about this. I have, again, I think that there's a lot of this available. It's about elevating up kind of where to go to get this information and why you want to know it. Yeah.
Thank you. So Laura, do you have any closing remarks? Do you have any closing remarks for our group?
Well, not that I can think of offhand. I think you should know that we are in this time of backlash, so it is very important that you not only vote but get everyone in your family to vote, but know what the candidates really stand for.
Lisa?
Um,
I know, pretty
I am
important.
sitting here because of you, and I think all of us owe it to each other to keep fighting for each other. And we have a remarkable opportunity in this state, given the leadership we have, to continue to be a leader and to take advantage of that. And so I'm delighted to be a part of it, and I think it's worth the fight.
Thank you. Now, I want to take a picture of the audience before you go. So. Everybody smile. Come on. Now, of course, it's, there we go.
Of course.
You're all in this together. So everyone smile. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we hope to do this.